honestly, man, I know sometimes it can be a bit draining, but I'm glad of the progress I'm making with these top 5 all-time lists. Now we're at the top 5 Milwaukee Bucks of all time. Previous installment was the Miami Heat. Next installment will be the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now this one's interesting because I'm going under the standard of I can only use a player one time per list. I already used Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for an all-time Laker, so I'm not going to use him for the Bucks. And I got Oscar Robertson planned for the Sacramento Kings / Kansas City Kings / Cincinnati Royals, since he played a majority of his career there. So he's not going to be on this list either, which opens up the door for some other names on this list. But without any further ado, here we go. And because of that, it opens the door for someone else to be the number 1 Buck of all time. So let's get into it. So for the top 5 Milwaukee Bucks, we'll start off with a few honorable mentions. He was actually just traded today. That's Kris Middleton, who was a good role player in that Milwaukee Bucks. When he was healthy, he played a key role in them winning that championship win. Alongside Brook Lopez, who was a solid role player, but I already used him for the greatest Brooklyn / New Jersey Nets of all time. I'm also going to use another honorable mention, Jrue Holiday, another good role player, both with Boston and with the Bucks as well. They weren't the greatest players in their franchise history, but worthy of mentions. Another one, Michael Redd, kind of an underrated player, a bit of a gem from the 2000s, multi-time All-Star who kind of gets forgotten about in historical 2000s NBA discussions. Michael Redd himself was a pretty good player, did his job, keeping the Bucks at least somewhat relevant in the Eastern Conference in the mid to late 2000s. Somewhat. They weren't that great a team. Redd wasn't the greatest player, but was at least good enough to keep them relevant, at least worthy of a mention. Same with his teammate, big man Andrew Bogut. It's a decent, good center for his era. Kind of a weaker era for centers amongst all-time history, but still, Andrew Bogut was a solid center for the Bucks on that team alongside Michael Redd, at least keeping them somewhat relevant in the East. They were at least worthy of honorable mentions. Now, on to the top 5 itself. This is where I'm going to fit in Ray Allen. He was taken originally in 96 not by the Milwaukee Bucks, but by the Minnesota Timberwolves. Then he was traded for Stephon Marbury, was taken by the Bucks as part of that draft day trade, along with another infamous draft day trade, but that's another story. But Ray Allen came in, he took over, made the Milwaukee Bucks contenders, leading the way in the early 2000s. Now, they never really got over the hump, and there is the asterisk of it being a weaker Eastern Conference and the fact that they didn't get far in the playoffs. However, on the same time, Ray Allen was one of the best three-point shooters of his era and one of the best of all time. At one point, held the record for most three-point shots made. And he helped keep the Milwaukee Bucks relevant. He even had a deep playoff run with them in 2001. Now, not the greatest player in their history, but at least one of the better ones. And that's what people remember Ray Allen individually as a player most for his Bucks days. We remember as a role player later on in his career winning championships, but as an individual, his best years with the Bucks, so I'm putting him here at number 5. Moving on to number 4. This is going to be a throwback, but let's check real. It's actually going to be Bob Dandridge. He's the only one from the big 3 of that 71 finals team that's on here. He averaged close to 18 points a game. He was behind Oscar Robertson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And considering they're not on this list, that opens room for him to at least get acknowledgement for his role in that 71 Bucks team. I'm sorry there's not much to say, but Bob Dandridge certainly at least deserves a nod in Bucks history. He did his role as a third man and led him to a championship. Now, moving on to number 3. We're going to go Sidney Moncrief. He was from the 80s Bucks teams, late 70s, early 80s. The team that was always in the mix, but always someone got the better of them. Either Boston or Philly, in those late early 80s. But Sidney Moncrief was one of the best Bucks of his era. He was a multi-time All-Star. He was also, he's also a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year. Or 3-time All-Defense. Yeah, he was also a 5-time All-Star, 4-time All-Defense. Started checking my notes for a second, but certainly one of the best players in their franchise's history. Now that opens the door. Now moving on to number 2. That's going to be Marques Johnson, who was the lead man on offense in those teams. Considered one of the best offensive players of his era. He played a great, significant role in keeping the Bucks relevant. Rightfully has his jersey retired by them. I believe he's in the Basketball Hall of Fame, but him is in Marques Johnson, Sidney Moncrief, one of the best 1-2 duos to never win a championship of all time. And it's only fitting that they both get on this list as the greatest Milwaukee Bucks. Now, because I'm not including Kareem because I got him on the Lakers list, I'm not including the Big O because I'm putting him on the Kings list. You guys know who's going to be the number 1 on this list. Giannis Antetokounmpo. Now you see why most would just call him Giannis. Kind of hard to pronounce his last name, but the Greek freak, man. He came in and he took over for a Milwaukee Bucks team that was doo-doo in the mid-2010s. And he was the face of that rebuild, and they've been contenders ever since the late 2010s. And it paid off in 2021 with them winning an NBA Finals, with Giannis being the Finals MVP. Now, some people argue he has his weak points, and that's why he's not the current face of the league, but he helped make the Bucks champions again, leading the way. And like I said, since I can't use other players that were part of that first championship run, it's only fitting that Giannis is the number 1. He's still the leader of that team. Could he win another chip? Maybe, maybe not. Time will tell. But Giannis Antetokounmpo just took over. Several conference finals appearances, leading face of the Milwaukee Bucks, probably the second best era in franchise's history. When you factor in, you can't, like I said, the asterisk, gotta include him as the number 1 under those conditions. Definitely, and there's still more to come from Giannis, so who knows what's going to happen. But all-around great player, solid shooter for a big man, great in the paint, good on defense. And that's what you want from one of your best players. So that's my list right there. Top 5 Milwaukee Bucks of all time. You can comment, let me know who your top 5 are. And also make sure to drop a like, subscribe so you don't miss out on more content. Coming up next in the series, going to do the Minnesota Timberwolves, so stay tuned.